Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the doors and here's other people.
Well, we're still in our series this morning, Beneath the Steeple, talking about the church and what the original intent was, or the design was, or the thought was, or what God intended for that. And just as a recap, week one was the design, and we talked about that it's about the presence of God. Unless you have the presence of God, it doesn't matter what you do without that, if you don't have that. And if you do have that, it still doesn't matter what you do. Things are going to happen. Lives are going to change. So it's about the presence of God. That's what we need more than anything else, is for God to show up. Because if He shows up, everything changes. If He doesn't show up, then nothing can change, because it's all about Him. And we looked at the little section out of the Lord's Prayer, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." That's the whole idea of the church. That the rule of heaven on earth, or the rule of God's rule in heaven, would be the same rule, His rule right here. That His will would be done up there, that it would also be done right here in your life, in my life, in the world that we live in. And then last week we looked at the launch, is what we called it, and it's the infilling of the Holy Spirit in Acts. As Jesus came and hung out with the disciples, and then He left and He told them, hey, wait, hang on. Something's going to happen. The Holy Spirit's going to come, and then you're going to receive power. So hang on, just wait until that happens. Don't do anything until that happens. Just hang out. And then the Holy Spirit came, and amazing things. The lives of people began to change as the Holy Spirit led through that whole process. And we looked at how we need to be chasing the Holy Spirit and His presence in our lives, and our sensitivity to His movement in our lives, and not just the effects of the Holy Spirit, not just the healing, not just the release, not just the chains being dropped, but chasing the Holy Spirit Himself, because the Holy Spirit brings those things. But sometimes we get caught chasing the things. I need my bill paid, so let's chase that. But really, it's about the Holy Spirit. And so if week one was the dating part of the relationship, and week two was the marriage or the wedding part of the relationship, so we have the dating part being the Holy Spirit, and it's awesome. You remember back when you were dating the person that you love, you're right there. And then the wedding, that's all special, and the Holy Spirit shows up. If that's true, if we're going to relate those two things, then today we're going to be talking about when the honeymoon is over. That's kind of our subject for today. And this is perfectly illustrated in a couple of things we have here. The first one is this relationship that we see with Donald Duck. So this is the dating wedding issue right here. Yeah, this is it right here. So, they're in love. Look at the way they're looking at each other. They're holding on to each other. Life is bliss. And, you only see the good in each other. When you're dating or in the honeymoon stage, you just see the good in each other. And all the bad gets overlooked. The snoring gets overlooked. The bad bathroom habits get overlooked. And actually, you never let your partner see the bad bathroom habits. Those get saved for like the 7-Eleven or something else. Work. They get saved for work. You don't go to the bathroom at all unless you go at work. So because you don't want to, what I'm talking about. So, all of that is the pre-wedding or the wedding. The honeymoon stage, and then we have after the honeymoon stage. That's what happens right there. You come in, everything's great one morning, and then you walk in and you see the real person, you're like, oh wow, I didn't sign up for that, right? The honeymoon's over. So just kind of as a back and forth deal this morning, what are some signs that the honeymoon is over? Give me some feedback. You heard the sign the honeymoon is over? The children? Yeah, I would agree with that. Oh, no question about it. Man, it's there's all kinds of different ways the honeymoon is over. First of all, it's the kind of things that you have overlooked about the person that you no longer overlook. The little things that they have that were cute when you were dating them now drive you insane, and you let them know. Yeah. Be careful. There's the little things that you're like, oh, you really hum while you eat. All right. But we're going to deal with that now. Or whatever the case may be. You really pick your toenails with your teeth, really? I thought that was cute and you were flexible, when we were dating, but now it's kind of gross. It's good times. But yeah, we know the honeymoon is over. And in the church, they knew the honeymoon was over in Acts chapter 7. And that's kind of where we're going to land today. Between the end of chapter 6 and the first part of chapter 8, that's where we're going to be focused on. Because before this, man, the honeymoon was there. The Holy Spirit showed up. They busted out into the street. They were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they spoke in the languages of the people that were there, and they were understanding, and people were getting saved, and lives were being changed. And it was just this incredible group of people that were bound together by the Holy Spirit. They were meeting together every day in the temple courts. They were eating together with glad and sincere hearts and breaking bread in their homes, and life was awesome. The Holy Spirit was just thick over this place, and it was thick over their gathering, and every time they met, it was just like electric. Things were happening, man, and it was just amazing. And then we come to the end of chapter 6. And I'm going to read just a little bit here. Now Stephen, a man full of God's grace and power, did wonders and miraculous signs among the people. An opposition arose, however, from the members of the synagogue of the freedmen, Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria, as well as the province of Sicilia and Asia. These men began to argue with Stephen, but they could not stand up against his wisdom or by the Spirit by whom he spoke. Then they secretly persuaded some men to say, "We have heard Stephen speak words of blasphemy against Moses and against God." So they stirred up people and the elders and the teachers of the law, and they seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin. They produced false witnesses who testified, "This fellow never stopped speaking against the holy place and against the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs that Moses handed down to us." And all who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like that of an angel. So this is kind of the beginning of some opposition. Before this, no opposition. The Holy Spirit just slaying people, just making it happen, changing lives, healing people. I mean, everything was happening positive. And then all of a sudden, the religious side of things began to not like what was going on. The attention was shifting from them to this Jesus who was crucified, and they didn't like it. So they picked Stephen out. And he was full of the Holy Spirit and grace and power. Wow. They couldn't have picked a better dude. But they picked him out, and they trumped up some accusations, and they had some false witnesses come forward, and all of a sudden opposition. So all of chapter 7 is Stephen's speech to the Sanhedrin as he stands before them, and he just starts breaking down their history and going back through from Moses all the way through, and what happened and how God met their needs and how God led them, and he just kind of breaks it all down. And then at the end of chapter 7, he just kind of lets loose, and he said, "Oh man, you guys are whitewashed. I mean, you're horrible people. You got it all wrong." And he just kind of nails them for about 3 or 4 verses, just kind of nails them to the wall and calls them on the carpet. And they obviously didn't like that. And as they get down to the end of it, they couldn't handle it anymore. And the scriptures say that they actually gnashed their teeth and began to scream and rushed him. And they took him outside and they took his clothes off and they laid his clothes at the feet of a man named Saul. And then they threw stones until he hit him with stones until he died. They stoned him to death. And as he's being stoned, Stephen said, "Hey, God don't hold this sin against him." And then he gave up his spirit and he was done. He was dead. So the honeymoon's over right now. Holy Spirit was moving, things were happening, and all of a sudden, one of the guys that they recognized as full of the Holy Spirit and full of God's grace has just been killed. He's dead. And everyone saw this happen. This wasn't a small event on the side of town where rumor, got around. This was the main event. Everyone saw this happen. And he's dead. And the honeymoon is over. Two things happened here that I want to make sure that we pay attention to. Number one, God didn't save him. I would expect that. That would be my expectation. He's full of grace, full of God's grace, and full of the Holy Spirit. There's no reason why. If you line it up and you say, okay, maybe he didn't have everything right, or maybe his attitude was bad, or, if you could find fault with him in some area, then you could maybe justify the reason why God didn't save him, but you can't find it. Matter of fact, you find the opposite. He's so godly. But God didn't save him. And the second thing that we find is that persecution broke out against the whole church. In chapter 8, the first part of chapter 8, in verse 3, it says, Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. The honeymoon is over. Every day they met in the temple courts, they ate bread in their homes and ate with glad and sincere hearts, and they enjoyed the favor of all the people. And now they're getting put into prison. The honeymoon is over. The glory days of all of that is done, and now we have this other opposition. As they're in their homes, instead of meeting together with glad and sincere hearts, they're wondering if Saul's going to show up with his men and drag them off to prison. And the thing that we need to know about prison in these days is that it wasn't like prison now. It wasn't like you get 3 months and you get 6 months, and you get 12 years. No, prison had 2 objectives. Number one, they put you there until you were going to go to trial. So if you were awaiting trial, they put you in prison, or if you were awaiting execution. It was never a long-term deal. It's one or the other. Either you're waiting on trial or you're waiting to get killed, which usually didn't take very long because their politics weren't like our politics today. It was pretty short. And so if you were in prison and the reason they put you there was because of Jesus, and you just watched Stephen get killed, you kind of knew where you were going to end up. You kind of knew what your fate was going to be. And the honeymoon is over. And because of this, people scattered to Judea and Samaria. This is verse 1 and 4. On that day, great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. And those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Interesting to me that it just accounts for those areas, because in Acts chapter 1 verse 8, when we were looking at this before the second week, last week, it says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem," which is where the persecution broke out, "and Judea," which is now where they're being spread, "and Samaria," which is where they're being spread, and to the ends of the earth. It's interesting to me that God had a plan to spread His news, but it didn't come out of good things. It came out of persecution. It came out of hardship. It came out of, I'm fleeing because there's some hard things happening right now. I'm getting out of here because of this opposition. I'm getting out of here because I don't want to go to prison. We're getting out of here. We're kind of dispersing a little bit because I don't want them to see me. And through that process, what was meant for harm, what was meant to stop everything that was going on, actually promoted it, actually furthered God's cause. Saul was bent on destroying the church. And he was in charge when Stephen was stoned. He laid his clothes, the feet of Stephen's clothes was laid at Saul's feet. And he's putting them in prison. And out of that, the gospel spread and the church grew. And I want to suggest to you this morning something out of this story, is that trials refine us. Trials refine us. God has a purpose that will be accomplished, whether the good or the bad. He has something in your life that He wants to accomplish, and it'll be accomplished through good things or bad things. But all the time, there's so often that we go, "Oh man, look at the trials in my life. Would you pray that my trials will go away? Will you just pray that my trials will be taken from me, that they'll just disappear?" And maybe we need to pray a different prayer. There's a song by Hillsong United, one of my favorite songs. It's off their new album, and it's just incredible. Here's what some of the verses say. "So I'll praise you on the mountain, and I'll praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are, so I'll praise you in the valley all the same. You're no less God within the shadows, and you're no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and in the heartache, all the same." Earlier this week, I was in this song, and it was doing some stuff for me, so I just posted that little bit, and Lee responded to me, and this was his comment that was just so good. He said, "The mountain, usually written off negatively as an obstacle, is the very mechanism that God uses to be glorified and to elevate us to where He's taking us." Man, so true. So true. In 1 Peter chapter 1, 6 through 7, it says this, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Trials refine us. God can use the trials. He can work in the trials. He can work through the trials. But in our world, it just seems logical, and we seem to carry around this idea that nothing bad happens in my world. Nothing bad is going to happen. So everything good is coming. And if something bad shows up, then, it's, and it knocks us for a loop because something bad happens. So, in my world, bad doesn't happen to the church. Bad doesn't happen to God's people. That's supposed to be exempt. We're supposed to be exempt from bad things. God's people and the church are supposed to be, set aside and exempt from bad things. But that's not what we see in history. If you want to look at the apostles' deaths real quick, if we start out with Jesus, he was crucified. Stephen was stoned. Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded. Andrew was crucified. Thomas had 4 spears thrust through his body. Philip was tortured to death. Matthew was stabbed to death. Bartholomew was beaten with rods and beheaded. James was stoned and clubbed. Simon was crucified. And John was the only one who died of natural causes, but he died in exile. And this only after he survived being boiled alive in oil. So maybe our question needs to stop being, why is this happening to me? Maybe that doesn't need to be our question. Maybe our question needs to be, God, how can you be glorified in this? God, what do you want to do in the middle of this? What do you want to do in me? What do you want to do in my world? And how do you want your glory and your presence and your power to be displayed in this world through this? So let's have that. Let's have that. Because there's a difference in perspective, because here's the difference. It's either my life or it's his life. And sometimes we catch ourselves saying, God, why is this happening in my life? And there's a whisper from the other side going, it's not your life. It's mine. Because my life and your life has been bought and paid for. There has been a transfer of ownership to the King. My life is not my life anymore. It's not about me anymore. It's about him. So how I live and where I go and what I do is about him. It's not about me. So when bad things come, when things happen, I don't look around and go, woe is me, because it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about him. And God, how are you going to be glorified in this? Because that's what I want to see. How are you going to show up in this? Because that's what I want to see. I don't like it. It's not what I would choose. It's not my choice in the middle of this, God, but it's here. So how do you want to be glorified in it? How do you want your power to be displayed in it? And how can I position what you've given me so that that happens? How can I position this life that you've allowed me to live so that your glory is displayed through this issue, through this problem, through this thing? Because it's not mine. It's yours. I'm not living for me anymore. I'm living for you. I would love to give an example right now, but I would never make it through it. I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis. A very godly man who got cancer. And in the middle of it, people are asking, oh man, I can't believe this happened to you. I can't believe that it's you. And his response was, why not me? Why not? All I want to know is how God's going to be glorified in it. Wow, God. That's home right there. That hits home. This morning, I don't know where you are in your relationship with God and your surrender to him. If life is still all about me and what happens to me, or if life is all about him and how you're glorified in it. But I want to challenge us this morning, and I'm standing in the middle of this challenge as well. Instead of wrapping Jesus around my life, how about let's wrap our lives around Jesus? And transferring the ownership from me to him. That it becomes his life. that it becomes about Him. Everything that happens here is about Him, not about me. That my perspective changes. And that regardless of what the issues are going on around or in, it becomes about what glorifies God. And I got to tell you, sometimes I have issues with that as well. Because sometimes the things that are happening in or around are consuming. But it's about Him. We're going to go into the holy place for a while, and that's what we call this time, where we just kind of mark off a little bit of time to allow each of us to enter into a conversation with God, for us to position ourselves in a place that, God, you can do what only you want to do, and I'm going to allow you to do it. Just a time where we have a moment where we can listen to Him, where we can open our ears and just say, God, I want to hear what you want to say to me. And we can listen. Lee, would you do me a favor? And Dane, would you do me a favor? There's some 3x5 cards and some pens on the back over here. Would you guys get those and pass them out for me? I would appreciate that. Yep. And what I would like to ask for you to do as we go into the holy place is just take a card and a pen as they pass them out. And what are the trials that you're dealing with? What are the issues? What are the things that you look at and you go, you know what, this is an issue in my life. I don't know exactly how to do this, deal with this. Could be a relationship issue with a parent or a child or a coworker or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's an ex or a spouse or whatever, but it's an issue. Maybe it's work related, maybe it's financially related. Whatever the case may be, maybe it's health related. I don't know. But what's the issue that has your focus right now, that has your attention? What is that? Write that on the card. And then there's a couple of ways that you can deal with this morning. We're going to have some people at the back, and I would encourage you to take the card and go back there to one of the guys or ladies and say, hey, I want you to pray for me. Hand them the card and let them see the issue, and let them pray over you and pray God's peace over you and pray God's presence over you. Pray His will in your life. Or you can take the card and drop it in the wood box back there. That's a prayer box, and we're going to pray for you. You can write your name. You can keep it anonymous. It doesn't really matter to us. We're just going to pray for you because God knows who wrote that. Or you can take that card and rip it up, throw it away as a symbol of giving that over to God. God, I give it to you. And as you toss it in the trash can, God, I'm handing this over to you. But let's just take a few minutes and allow God to speak to us. Allow time to pray. And allow God to move.